Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story that actually bridges the gap between classic Cold War paranoia and, well, the very device sitting in your pocket right now. We are going to explore a completely hidden infrastructure of global communication that surrounds us 24/7, totally unseen. We'll start off with the high-stakes, hardware-heavy espionage of the 20th century, and then trace exactly how those exact same principles of covert communication evolved into something completely invisible, entirely silent, and honestly, potentially way more invasive today. Let's get into it. Picture this incredibly eerie late-night reality that thousands of shortwave radio hobbyists around the world have experienced. One of them, John Diefenbach, described it like this. At precisely 0317, my trusty shortwave radio begins to crackle to life with signals that seem to originate from nowhere. Imagine you're just sitting there in the dark, you're tuning a dial through the static, and suddenly, boom, you intercept a methodical, patterned burst of noise. And these aren't just random glitches, right? Hobbyists have logged these meticulously. We're talking precise 47-second encrypted bursts broadcasting right into the dead of night. So, part one, the shortwave mystery. For decades, the shortwave radio spectrum has essentially been haunted by things called number stations. These are entirely unidentified radio stations broadcasting formatted numbers and strange audio, day in and day out, all across the globe. And the scale of this operation? It's absolutely massive. I mean, you don't just broadcast a signal across entire oceans with a handheld walkie-talkie. It requires massive, sprawling antenna arrays pumping out incredibly powerful signals, anywhere from 10 to 100 kilowatts. Now, dedicated listeners have actually used direction-finding equipment to trace some of these signals right back to heavily guarded government properties. But of course, almost no government on Earth will publicly admit what they're actually up to. To kind of mask their true purpose, these stations don't just read dry lists of numbers. They use this incredibly surreal audio to introduce their broadcasts. You might be tuning in and suddenly hear a weirdly synthesized voice reading phonetic alphabets, or maybe bells, gongs, or even, and this is super creepy, ice cream truck-style music boxes. One of the absolute most famous ones, dubbed the Swedish Rhapsody station, actually played an eerie music box rendition of the Luxembourg polka, right before a voice would just randomly shout, Achtung, and then start reading strings of numbers. Moving right along to Section 2, Spies on the Airwaves. Obviously, these stations aren't just avant-garde art projects, they are purpose-built tools for spies. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth use shortwave radio? Well, it comes down to one absolutely crucial concept: plausible deniability. Imagine an undercover operative working under diplomatic cover, maybe living at a foreign embassy. If that agent gets their instructions via the internet or a phone call, it leaves a hard digital trail, right? It's totally vulnerable to traffic analysis. But a shortwave signal, that literally bounces off the ionosphere. It can be picked up by anyone, anywhere in the world using a cheap, standard consumer radio, and getting caught with a normal radio, that proves absolutely nothing. And crucially, this whole system, it's not just some relic of the past. It actually started as far back as World War I with Morse code, peaked during the Cold War, and continues right up to this day. In 2001, the United States convicted the Cuban 5 spy ring, who were actively getting their orders from a number station called Atención, and the network is still very much alive. Just recently, in February 2026, right during conflict and major internet blackouts in Iran, a brand new Farsi language number station designated V32 just fired up out of nowhere, broadcasting structured numeric groups. Oh, and remember that super creepy Swedish Rhapsody broadcast I mentioned earlier? For years, listeners genuinely thought the broadcaster was a young girl forced to read numbers in German. But declassified documents from Polish intelligence finally revealed the truth. It wasn't a little girl at all. It was actually a highly specialized machine called the Sprach Morse generator, used by the East German Stasi. They had basically just tweaked the audio settings, which inadvertently made the synthesized voice sound exactly like a child. So it was literally a machine delivering state secrets. Wild, right? Which brings us to Section 3, the unbreakable cipher. Now you're probably thinking, okay, if anyone with a $50 radio can hear these messages, isn't that incredibly insecure? Well, the secret sauce protecting the data is something called the one-time pad. This is a cryptographic system where the sender and the receiver have completely identical pads of randomly generated numbers. The actual message is then mathematically added to these random numbers. As long as the pad is truly random and the key is never, ever reused, the cipher is mathematically impossible to break. An enemy intelligence agency could intercept the broadcast perfectly, every single number. But without that specific one-time pad in the agent's hand, they have absolutely nothing. A brute force attack simply does not work. All right, let's pivot the narrative a bit here. We've established that the ultimate spy tool of the 20th century was external, right? A massive antenna farm broadcasting to a cheap plastic radio. But as technology has exploded, how do intelligence agencies gather that kind of covert data now? What exactly is the modern equivalent? Let's get into Section 4, the spy in your pocket. The ultimate spy tool today isn't some massive, overt broadcasting array. It's actually hidden deep inside the mobile phone architecture we carry around completely unawares. And the magic number to understand this is 3. Most of us just look at our smartphone and think of it as one single computer. But talk to telecommunications experts and they'll tell you a standard smartphone actually contains 3 distinct, completely independent computers. Let's quickly break down this device hierarchy. Step 1 is the application processor. That's what runs your iOS or Android. It's the shiny screen, the apps, everything you actually touch and see. Step 2 is the baseband processor. This handles the actual radio frequencies and telecom functions. But step 3 is the real shocker here, the SIM card. Now, I know it just looks like a dumb little piece of plastic, but it is actually a fully independent computer. It has its very own operating system, its own file system, and honestly, about as much computing power as a desktop computer from 20 years ago. Telecom expert David Allen Burgess sums this up perfectly. He points out that the telecom network absolutely does not care about your fancy iOS or your Android apps. From their point of view, the baseband processor and the SIM are the phone. Your beautifully designed operating system, that's just a bolt-on accessory. And here is the real kicker. Your Apple or Android operating system has absolutely zero visibility into the communications happening down at that level between the SIM card and the baseband processor. They're totally blind to it. All right, Section 5, silent digital surveillance. This brings us to the rather unsettling reality of proactive SIMs. Because that tiny, independent computer in your phone, it's not just sitting there passively. It can proactively send messages without you ever knowing it. Let's look at a fascinating legal case that actually exposed this. There was a car crash, and during the ensuing lawsuit, an attorney subpoenaed the mobile operator, AT&T, for the driver's phone records. Well, the records showed the phone sent a text message to a bizarre number exactly at the moment of the crash. The immediate assumption, of course, was distracted driving. But upon deep technical analysis, it was proven that the driver didn't send the text. The phone's operating system didn't send it either. The SIM card autonomously generated and sent a silent SMS directly to the telecom network, leaving zero trace on the user's actual phone screen. So what exactly is the SIM card silently whispering to the network? Well, this list right here outlines the kind of intelligence dossier it can compile. It can send your phone's unique serial number, the IMEI. Amazingly, it even remembers and transmits the IMEI of the previous phone the SIM was installed in. It sends your geographic cell ID and location area code. It can even theoretically grab your call logs and GPS data. And what actually triggers these silent transmissions? Honestly, it could be something as simple and routine as just receiving a standard software update from Apple or Google. The potential implications of this architecture are pretty staggering when you really think about it. Now, sure, telecom companies are mostly using these silent, proactive SMS messages for basic internal network management. But the architecture itself is a ready-made vector for state-level surveillance. If a state-owned intelligence agency operates a mobile network, they could easily leverage these proactive SIMs as an invisible, highly targeted mass surveillance tool, completely bypassing all the encryption and security of your phone's main operating system. So let's just quickly compare these two eras of covert communication. Back in the 20th century, spies had to rely on shortwave radios. Yes, it was an analog broadcast that gave them great plausible deniability, but they still had to physically tune a piece of hardware and manually write down numbers. Today, with proactive SIM cards, the intelligence gathering is completely internal. It's a digital transmission that happens autonomously, leaving absolutely zero forensic evidence for you to find. It is entirely 100% frictionless. Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. We used to look out into the night sky, wondering exactly who was broadcasting those mysterious shortwave numbers through the static. But today, the most sophisticated covert transmitter isn't some massive antenna array miles and miles away. It's that tiny, silent piece of plastic we eagerly carry with us everywhere we go. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious.